Okay, it is now recording, so do not say anything that's off the record because this will be going on an unlisted YouTube video and sent out to the rest of the paying subscribers. Okay, hello everybody. I am Simon Owens. You probably all know that. You're probably, if you're watching this right now, you are subscribers to my newsletter. I write about the media industry, and every month or every 2 weeks now that we've hit the right threshold, I'm going to be hosting these office hours. Ooh, we got Mignon in here. I'm going to be hosting these office hours where we just basically chat, and I really want it to be a chat. Like, I don't want this to be a one-way lecture at all. My goal is to speak as little as possible. I would just love to shut up and listen to other people. So do not hesitate to join in on the discussion, share your expertise, and if you do so, then hopefully you will kind of shift the conversation to where we can actually start peppering you with questions if you have something interesting to add. So definitely speak up. um just please stay muted when you're not speaking, and that's just so that we don't get any like random noises in the video, because the video is like sound sensitive. It makes sure it stays on whoever's speaking. And then, as I mentioned before, for people who are just now coming in, if you feel comfortable doing so, just leave your name, a one sentence bio, and if you feel comfortable doing so, your email address as well, in case people want to email you afterwards if there's any networking or anything like that. Okay, so to get started, the thing we're talking about tonight is building an online community. This is something that I have written about recently. It's becoming like a more and more of a facet of what a lot of publishers have been experimenting with lately. I'm sure all of you remember, but there was like this several year period where it seemed like every major publisher was just announcing that they were shutting down their comment section. They were outsourcing all of that stuff to social media, saying if our readers want to have discussions, and they could do so on Twitter or Facebook or whatever. And so they basically eliminated any way to interact on their website. And over the last like year or so, we've seen like a complete about face within the industry, as they want to become less and less reliant on these outside platforms like Facebook. And also because there's a lot of data that's starting to emerging that by having people engage, like people who are commenting or participating in communities, they're much more likely to be repeat visitors to your website, so that they're more they basically generate more impressions that could be sold ads against. They provide more first party data, because a lot of times it involves turning over their email address and other information. And then three, a lot of them are able to be, monetized, as hopefully Brad can talk about tonight, where some publishers are actually starting, online communities where there's actually a paywall on it, and you have to pay in order to gain access to it. So there's lots of benefits from that. So let's talk about first, things to consider. And one of the biggest things you got to consider is, which platform you're going to use. There's like platforms on social media sites, like there's Facebook groups, there's Twitter has a groups tool now, there's Reddit, and then there's also kind of third party platforms that are mainly agnostic in terms of distribution, but things like Slack and Discord. So that's the first major choice that you have to make. Of course, most of you are aware, I chose Facebook groups, and a lot of publishers, they warned me away from it. They would never build a community on Facebook groups because, obviously Facebook in some ways has been, very antithetical to the interest of the publishing industry, especially as they have shifted their priorities away from news, and which has definitely hurt a lot of publishers. But it's still the most visited one of the most visited websites on the planet. So in terms of getting your your community in front of people on a site that they're visiting every day, it's a great choice. Brad, how about we talk to you a little bit? So you run, first kind of introduce yourself and just tell them what you do real quick.
Yeah, sure. So I started at The Hustle, which is a daily business and tech newsletter a few years ago. And then we were acquired by HubSpot about a year and a half ago. And at The Hustle, we started a paid circulation product called Trends, which is an entrepreneurs community. We also do a weekly newsletter where we unearth business ideas and opportunities for entrepreneurs. And I think Lexi, if I'm remembering correctly, you're in that community. You're part of that group. Is that right? Um, it has about 15,000 members right now. And I think the thing about it that has been more powerful than we imagined was when we started it, and I can't remember if you were in the very early stage group, Alexi, when we first started it. This was like the end of 2018, early 2019. The idea behind the Facebook group was just like, we knew people were on Facebook and we just started a small community of like maybe 50, 100 people who were sort of like early users. And we started throwing ideas out in that group. And before we even launched the product, we used them as kind of like a test lab to see what people were interested in, what kinds of reports they would like to read. And that group, that's like, I think a lot of people still to this day tell us that the most valuable thing that they pay for, which is about $300 a year for the service, is the research that we do on a weekly basis. It comes in the form of an email, but they come for that, and they often stay for the community, because community is a way for them to find answers to their own questions rather than us just talking at them. And so over the years, we've started to use the community as journalists a lot more, as a two-way street rather than just us sending these research reports out. We really use the community to get feedback on early stage ideas. We often find things that they're talking about and write about those. And we have one of the most popular sections of our newsletter is just a listing of like 10 or 15 links to discussions that have happened in the Facebook group that week. So you brought up the question of whether to be on Facebook, which I think is a valid one. I hate every day that we're on there in a lot of ways, but the founder of my company was, sort of intent on starting there, and I don't think that it would be easy for us to navigate off there, even though I think a fair number of our audience doesn't even use Facebook, and a lot of them who do come into our community tell us that the only reason they're on Facebook is because of the Trends community.
And anybody else, feel free to jump in and ask Brad questions, but I'm going to continue asking him questions, in the meantime. So I think like the reason why, so The Hustle is kind of considered one of the gold standard. I have conversations with newsletter entrepreneurs every day, and almost all of them cite either The Hustle or The Morning Brew as being their inspiration for what they did with their own newsletter, their own niche newsletter. My guess is the reason that Sam Parr, the founder, was so intent on Facebook was because you had previously had a lot of success with The Hustle's Facebook group, right? Where you had a referral program, and if somebody referred 10 people to the newsletter, then they got access to this private Facebook group, right?
Exactly. That was it's called the ambassadors, the Hustle ambassadors, and a lot of different newsletters use referral programs in different ways. We felt like, because people really loved the vibe of The Hustle and they sort of felt like they were part of a community, that we might as well start a community. And then I think it was popular for a long time just because people from our team would come in and just hang out and chat with people. And, Sam was sort of he's a polarizing figure. He's not obviously someone everyone loves, but he's he's been, in a lot of ways, he's been very successful, and I think he's controversial and he'll kind of say anything he wants. So I think a lot of people gravitated to that. And that was, I think, one of the first signs that we would use Facebook, is because that's where people were hanging out, even young people at the time.
Yeah. And so how do you, so talk about so you talked about the like you do roundups of things that are in the Facebook group, in the newsletter, and I think that's like a really important part of getting your Facebook group to be active, and to encourage people to to participate in the Facebook group is to actually pull content out of the Facebook group, utilize it in the newsletter, and then that pushes the fresh group of people. How do you onboard people into Facebook? Because obviously it doesn't connect to a CRM or anything like that. What's the kind of process for introducing a new subscriber to the Facebook group?
It's manual. They
Yeah.
have to, they have to request to get in the group, and then we have to sort of match that they've paid for the service and the email they use to pay for the service with the one that they're, coming to us with. So we have to sort of just manually do it. It's kind of a laborious process, but we have a bunch of different community managers who can approve, people who come in the group. But as part of the onboarding, when you buy the product, you are introduced to the Trends Facebook community with, some links to some of the most popular posts. We give you a little bit of a roadmap to like how you use the Facebook community, because it's actually an incredible resource. You can just go use the search function, and Facebook actually has quite a good search function. So for, past content, if you're in the space of like e-commerce or whatever your thing is as an entrepreneur, you can just search that up and you'll find all kinds of posts. And usually it, populates the most popular posts, the ones that have had the most comments and engagement. I think we also we have to moderate the community pretty tightly, because with that many people in it, you can imagine that, a lot of people come in thinking, oh, I'm just going to kind of essentially promote their own product or service and, try to get some sort of promotion out of that. But we're really strict about our community moderation guidelines. We really let very few posts actually even get approved, which is probably a bit of a problem in other
Oh,
ways.
really? So the majority of the posts get like blocked?
We give people feedback, and we have a set of kind of guidelines that they should know, but a lot of times people don't realize how self-promotional they're being. So we have to sort of redirect them, at least on first try. Most of them don't actually get approved. And then we have to tell them, here's what you have to do to sort of get past the moderating bar, basically.
What do you hold up as like the gold standard of a conversation that's happening in Trends where you're like, wow, this is where the values, this is what they're paying $300 a year for?
I don't want to be the only one who talks on here.
No, don't worry.
I want, maybe Lexi can comment on this too, but she has a great thing going on with what she's building. But I also think she's probably can observe this as a user of the community, or as a member of the community. I think what I hold up as gold standard is a person who has a lot to offer. They come in and they have something that they've done or they've learned, and they can share it. And in the same way that you would say the same thing on Twitter or any other platform, it's like, but the nice thing about Facebook and being in this group is it just tends to it brings out these posts that are just really revealing and intricately detailed about how people built things and, how people scaled their businesses, things like that. So I think the best posts are ones that are just really tightly focused on a particular thing that was successful for them and that they've learned lessons from. And then a lot of people chime in and they find value in that.
Mm-hmm. Does anybody else have any questions for Brad? He runs a very successful online community. Really good opportunity to ask him any questions you have about that. Pete.
I have a question.
Sure.
Brad, you said that you would prefer not to have used Facebook, and I'm curious what you would prefer to use. Either is there a specific platform that, if you could start over, you would use now, or what are there specific features, requirements, things that you would look to that seem important?
This is a question that we wrestle with when we think about if we want to stay on Facebook. Is it the best platform? And I don't have a great answer to that, because in part, that's why I'm here tonight. I was hoping to kind of hear from others what they're doing and what's successful. I do think that I think it depends on the audience and the sort of demographic of the audience. Younger audiences, I think, would probably be more comfortable and accustomed to using Discord as a platform. I think most people are comfortable on Slack, but I just haven't heard of anyone have a lot of success with Slack. It feels like anything you use, it's going to require moderation, and it's going to require whoever's curating information for the community, or whoever's sort of leading the community, to be highly involved. And so, I mean, I can speak to other examples of other communities that I see that I think are really successful. They tend to actually be on Facebook, and I don't know why that is. It's just, I mean, it's easy. It's like, you know, I have colleagues who are reporters who are members of hundreds of Facebook groups, because they're just like, there's a Facebook group for almost anything. And so as much as we can sit here and kind of denigrate the platform and say negative things about it, it does offer a lot of positives. The negatives that I see that I think would be better on other platforms are the fact that you can't necessarily, like, Facebook decides what it's going to put in front of you. And so when you come in the group, there may be more recent posts or better posts, or posts that are more likely to be things that you would engage with, and you may never even see those. If you search for them, you might find them, but that's a big downside. And I do think that having platforms where you can see chronologically what's happening, and you can just kind of come back in and check in, and then you know everything that's happened since you left. I like that a lot more.
Well, like one thing I definitely get some complaints, because I do my group through Facebook group, and so, every now and then I get a person who writes to me and says, well, I'm not on Facebook. You know, you should be having, you know, this on Slack, or like, usually they pitch me on doing it on Discord or something like that. And so it's just something that I kind of, you know, it's kind of like you said, you're almost kind of making a deal with the devil. I have noticed recently, though, that, and Brad, I don't know if you've seen this too, is the reach has definitely been going down recently for my Facebook group. It's obvious that Facebook has found its new shiny toy, which is Reels, Instagram Reels, which it's starting to incorporate into the Facebook feed itself, and it's starting to recommend a lot of content from, you know, pages and stuff that you don't follow. So I think my big project for 2023 is going to be launching on a more kind of third-party platform, not leaving Facebook group, but no longer promoting it within my newsletter. So basically it'll be kind of like this, you know, stuck in time, where everybody who's already in there will continue participating, but I'm not going to be, you know, pushing more people into that platform. So that's something, you know, I've been thinking about coming forward. Pete, introduce yourself. What are you thinking about in terms of communities and product and stuff like that? What have you been up to?
I'm in the course of this conversation, just thinking back to my time at LinkedIn, where I left, which I left a couple of years ago, but was there for 4 years and ran a lot of the feed and content products. And it was the time of LinkedIn's sort of evolution into really thinking a lot about content and the role of community and things like that. And so, you know, before I talk about what I am doing, I would just say that, like, if any of you have been involved with LinkedIn groups at any point in the last like 10 years, you will know that it's been hugely turbulent. And while I never had the misfortune to actually manage groups directly myself, I was like closely involved with it from the point of view of the feed. And I think one of the things I would just say, Brad, like you mentioned, the moderation tools, and those Facebook like content moderation tools are the envy of anyone trying to build any community, because it's really, really hard to provide good assistance to moderators and administrators to moderate a conversation. And I just think the contrast between what we always thought of as like the asynchronous, like longer form content, which groups in a kind of a posting format allows, versus what you have to deal with in a Discord or Slack channels, where you can't moderate like synchronous conversation at least in a sort of constructive kind of like thematic kind of way, where you can go organize that. And they become just, they're wildly different experiences in communities. And it's interesting, you know, the early theory was, oh, there's like all the people are on Facebook, so it's like really easy and they'll see all the content. And actually, over time, I think a lot of the value in groups has become much more the community. And sometimes you said, like, you don't even see the stuff actually in your feed. They make it easier to get to from the navigation. But yeah, it's not like it's there as sort of a part of an experience and not like core to it.
Yeah, Pete, you know, it was a few, like 6 or 7 years ago, LinkedIn groups were kind of like an up and coming thing, and that it would have been the best platform, because it's like obviously a B2B social network. It'd have been a great way to network with other people. Here's what I think happened. I think that like a whole bunch of like content marketing thought leadership bloggers went and posted these posts about how to get your content in front of people. And the advice that they gave was to basically join every single LinkedIn group in your niche and then spam the hell out of it with every blog post that you write. And it just kind of like all those LinkedIn groups just became spam centers, don't you think?
That there was a lot of that, and coupled with that was a very liberal approach to using email to advise people of updates and what had happened in groups. And in some ways, it was like the precursor to like the newsletter boom, which is like you could just get basically you could use a platform to go reach other people like in sales and like certain people who you knew you could go target, and you could just go be in their email inbox because you posted into the group. And this is pretty, public and well documented. Just when LinkedIn tried to relaunch groups, actually some of the biggest challenges they had was with those people that you mentioned, Simon, who had administered these groups and found them very beneficial for their own like business practices that they had at the time. I will not go into the detail in something that can be found at a later date, but like it kind of kills me because I think LinkedIn's opportunity to foster, Brad, you run like communities for entrepreneurs and startups, like talking about like best practices in it. Like if there's ever a platform that should be fantastic at making that work, where you've got the reputation, the credibility of the people that are involved, it clearly should be LinkedIn.
Yeah. And so you run an audio platform now. There's famously not very good communities for audio. I know that Spotify is supposedly going to be launching comments on podcasts, but I don't know. What do you think in terms of like podcasters and community?
So I began my career as a radio journalist at the BBC, and sort of took this voyage through other content platforms like WordPress and LinkedIn, Medium, and I've been really looking forward to the opportunity to get back to working on audio, because I think audio done well has the opportunity to foster that community in really great ways. Because I have one right now, like we listen like with things literally stuffed in our ears to like hear people, like the proximity that we have to the conversations and to the ways in which we can engage with people, the way in which audio can create sort of authenticity, and that personal connection is like way greater than any other platform. And so I think that my general theory in this is that we sort of entered a cul-de-sac in the world of podcasts. We got to kind of back ourselves out of it and like find the path back to like evolving what audio and what radio can be. If you think of like good community radio, good talk radio, the communities around that are incredibly strong. And actually I've been studying a little bit lately, partly Simon, from a tip from you, some of the podcasters that have built a lot of community, and very often they've actually come from radio. They've had a show on radio where they've had really great community, and they brought that community with them to their podcast. And so I think the opportunity to build community through audio is great. I think that there are a lot of structural challenges to doing it, and so we're taking sort of some brave decisions to like try to not worry about podcasts and try to like work with a different platform, work with a different format to get there. But I think it is a great opportunity if used sort of in a thoughtful way. I'm not sure that adding comments below podcasts is going to be the way to do it. And actually going back, like my experience is that some of the best communities around podcasts, again, exist in Facebook groups, where often they're organic and actually not even the podcasts themselves. They've just been created by fans who want to get together. And that kinship that people feel, the community people feel around even just listeners. You remember, like, even today, I think, but certainly like, I don't see people in real life anymore, but like pre-pandemic, kind of when we did, and you would talk to someone and discover that you listened to the same podcast as each other. And it was like a moment, like you like that connection that people feel. So I think it's tremendous opportunity, but we may need a different platform in order to be able to make this work.
Yeah, I've been impressed with Twitter Spaces. I think they did a really good job of cloning Clubhouse, and some podcasters like the Tech Meme Ride Home, which is a famous tech podcast. They have a weekly live Spaces, which they record live. They have some live discussion, and then they record that, and then they actually distribute it as a podcast episode on their normal podcast feed. So I just think that's just such a fantastic way to, and I think more podcasters should definitely emulate it. It's been something that I would love to do at some point. Obviously, this thing that we're doing now is sort of like a community play where I'm a way to have a little bit of observing other people talk, but also talk yourself and foster a greater connection. So this is like a very high lift version of a Twitter space that we're in right now. Louis, I think you raised your hand next.
Thanks, Simon. Thanks to Pete and Brad.
Jeff, we'll get to you next.
I have some questions for you both. I ran Climate Risk Review, a newsletter about climate finance and risk, and it's now been acquired by Manifest Climate. But I actually got a lot of my startup in LinkedIn. I built my audience a lot of LinkedIn in my personal account. I was one of those people who used to spam a few climate change groups, and I did get a few pickups from that, but I did notice engagement was very low on those groups because of those exact dynamics you talked about, Pete. But I'm interested in one question for you, Pete, on audio communities. I see that LinkedIn's actually planning to launch audio events itself. I think one of my problems with spaces and audio events like that is that it's difficult to be involved in them asynchronously. Sometimes I'll get in and they'll be halfway through the conversation, and that kind of makes me feel like, oh, well, I don't really know what they're talking about, so I'm going to get off. So I was interested in thoughts about how maybe you should do spaces every hour, very short spaces, every hour for 5 minutes, so that people can come and they don't feel like they're lost. I don't know how to think about trying to make audio events myself that people can dip into and out of without feeling alienated by not being there at the beginning. And then for Brad, I'm interested in this Facebook group phenomenon, because how do you make something that's really unsexy? Because anybody can create a Facebook group. How do you give that sense of exclusivity? Of course, you have the payment you have to do, but how do you make sure the content is good and sexy enough that people feel like, oh, I'm not just paying to get onto Facebook, I'm paying for this extra cool community? Thank you.
Brad, you want to tackle that one?
Sure. Happy to take that one. I think your question is, how did we make the content good enough? Is that where you're going, or is it more about the community?
Well, I think he's talking about how to solve the ghost town problem, which I think every early community has. Is like it's kind of the chicken or the egg thing. Like you need to make it desirable, but you can't make it desirable until you already have a lot of people in there and discussing and stuff like that.
But also making it desirable in an old platform, which is Facebook. And I've had Facebook groups that are parents have set up and my family set up, and I don't think of a cool community being on Facebook, and obviously you've made that happen.
Yeah, I mean, I have to credit Sam. I think Sam is the one he just had a lot of connections and a lot of friends who happened to be on Facebook or came on Facebook to have chats about this. And he, he also had a lot of people who he was consulting with in the early days of both building the hustle and trends. They weren't exactly investors, but maybe they were sort of stakeholders in some way. They just thought that the product was cool. And I think there's literally probably 100 people we put in overnight. And there was, because of Sam mostly, but also because of the quality of people that came in initially. And they were investor level type people who had built multi-million and billion-dollar businesses. The level of discourse was high from the start, and that became very infectious. And then I think that actually helped us build trends as much as anything, because people wanted to be part of that community. I'm in a Telegram group that's called Type House, which is newsletter writers. And it's obviously newsletters aren't, I think, as Simon and others have written about recently, they're not they may have had their moment, but there's an energy to that group that once they start talking about something, and then you've got 10 or 15 of the best business news writers in the country that are in this group that have something to say. And as long as you have people who are willing to give as much as they take, or maybe more willing to give than they take, then I think that works. And I think you have to have that buzz early. So if you start it and it's crickets, then it's going to be hard for you to sell it for more people for it to sort of take off. But if you start it with a really nice corpus of people and they all have a lot that they're willing to engage on and not just sort of listen to others and take, then that's really also the key.
Jeff, hey, you had something you wanted to say. Just give us a 1-sentence bio.
Co-founder of a company called VoteLight. It's a civic tech platform, and we work a lot with news organizations. Yeah, so I just wanted to share my perspective. So I've joined a bunch of communities over the past year, and just from a technical perspective, I just want to share with you kind of my feedback as a user who's in a community, right? Not
Sure.
running it, not moderating it.
Yeah.
So the ones that I've seen have been, obviously, Simon, you use Facebook, which, I find Facebook is not very conducive to community, which is obviously different, I think, from, Brad's experience. And, they've had a lot of, a large amount of people for a long time. I'm not a big fan of the Facebook groups. The others that I've used are Discord and Slack. And I think Slack's getting a lot of, Slack seems to be very easy for groups to run. And the Slack communities I've seen, I see Susan from INN. There's Lion, right, uses Slack, and they have a great community with a lot of good feedback. And I think if you have like a professional community, I think Slack can do a very good job. And then on the Discord side, I sign up to the Platformer, right, with Casey Newton. And that has a very robust community that works out well. And there's no, content moderation issues around that community. So I guess what I'm saying is, my feedback is, I think Facebook is just harder. I don't like the experience of Facebook. I think Discord can be very good, and it promotes, timely threads. And Slack, Slack is, I think, going to be something that a lot of groups will tend to transition to versus starting in Facebook. So just want to kind of share my feedback on the actual technical options out there. I don't know if people have feedback or if you all have had a chance to be a member using Facebook and Slack and Discord. But if I were to rate them, I would say Slack and Discord, have had good communities in the groups that I've participated in. So just wanted to share.
Yeah, I think like Slack and Discord are probably the best in terms of a decentralized platform that a lot of people use. I guess my problem with it, and I think I'm probably going to launch on Slack or Discord in 2023, is just the feeling of being overwhelmed, because I don't hang out in these groups all day, and you're trying to find the context of the conversation. And it just becomes so overwhelming that I just kind of eventually just tap out and stop going as much. And so that's always been kind of my problem. Whereas like people who live in Slack all day with their work, they're used to being in Slack all the time. I don't know. I had this one client back when I was doing consulting who I had to be in their Slack channel, and I just felt it was just so stressful. So that's just something that's why I like Facebook groups, is it has an algorithm that surfaces things to the top based on the amount of engagement they're getting, and so that's why I always like Facebook. But like I said in the beginning, Facebook can take away your reach. It owns your audience, whereas like Slack and Discord, you actually get to own your audience. So you run the Institute for Nonprofit News. That's what it's called.
Yeah, it's INN is a network of about 410 newsrooms now. It's grown very rapidly. It's a lot of startups, some that have been around decades, like the Forward, Mother Jones. And so I'm interested. Our staff uses Slack. I hate Slack, but I'm an outlier, so I do use it at work. I'm curious, not so much around the communities we use as journalists, but we are seeing in some of these startups, what they're news startups, they don't look like news sources to begin with, because they're building the community first. It's not like we're just using social media to promote what we do. They do very well news reporting. They build the community, and then they start getting more and more news out of it and for it. And one of the things I'm interested that I posed this question is, I live in LA, and so you see these communities really forming in pop culture, fan communities in gaming. There's big communities, and I am really curious if if anybody knows anyone looking at how do you inject news into those communities or get them involved in it. It happens naturally with some influencers if they're the only news source, quote unquote, even if they write like, even if they're a fashion influencer, but they're the only widely recognized source in their neighborhood, they may start reporting little news bits in their neighborhood. And I'm just interested in this whole area. It's very early. There was a flurry around influencers, what, 2018, 2019, and it kind of died down in the news space. So I was throwing out that random question around. And thank you, Lexi. That was interesting on Web3.
Yeah, so I've seen definitely, like, I don't think like the community itself is a good place to put like original news, just or original reporting and stuff like that, because it just kind of gets lost in the noise. One, it can get buried, and then also how do you, if you're, I don't know, if you start creating that standard, then how are you vetting the news for truthfulness? Like if you're a reporter, you can, but then if other people start getting into the original reporting, like how are you fact checking their stuff? But I have seen, like you said, that like there's lots of spin-off publications from that start off communities. I was talking to a guy a few weeks ago who they you know, we have this rise of retail investors right now because of like Robinhood and stuff like that. And so he was just like a retail investor, Robinhood enthusiast, and started a Slack channel for, you know, amateur investors, and they were trading tips and stuff like that. And then he kind of spun off a media company from there. He launched a newsletter and stuff like that, and kind of like formalized the content flow where, you know, there were, and I think they launched a podcast and stuff like that. So I think that's the kind of natural direction if you're going to start as, but I like this idea of starting as a community first, building up that kind of you know, that kind of camaraderie and stuff like that, and then launching a media company from that. Have you been seeing anything interesting with your members in terms of how they're leveraging different groups to foster a greater connection to their audience?
Yeah, absolutely. One that's now getting quite a bit of recognition too, or getting quite a bit of recognition around the country, but one is City Bureau in Chicago. And when we first became aware of them, they were holding community meetings on the south side of Chicago, an area poorly covered, not a lot of community engagement, subject, you know, an area with a lot of racial tension. And they started getting 60 and 70 people to community meetings every week. And they were training journalists. Initially, they were just doing like a little bit of coverage, maybe once or twice a month. But then they started training these people who were engaged to go document public meetings that there's no reporters at. And now their documenters program has been duplicated in multiple states. They just got, I want to say like 10 million to spread it out. And when we first looked at them, you know, you're looking at going, well, this looks like a training site and it's like community meetings. Is it really journalism? And it really is. Just it started with community meetings and community. And then now there's more and more journalism coming out of that. Outlier, which is well known, based in Detroit, started with SMS messaging people in Detroit about housing values and housing issues. These are generally populations where the phone's the only medium, really, not affluent neighborhoods at all. And then they started to get back information from the consumers, and that turned into journalism. They're still out there. There's a brand new, less than a year, organization in Kansas City called The Defender. And it was started specifically aimed at Black Gen Z folks who are not getting news from any other source. And The Defender, if you look at it, I mean, its primary medium is social media. It's done some basketball takeovers of local parks. It's building a community of young people. And if you talk to them, they're like, no, we'll get to do more and more news. They do a little bit of news. It's much more. And they're like, we're building the community first and getting that orientation, and then more and more news will follow. So we are seeing this happen. And it's intriguing, and it does happen a lot more in the nonprofit space than the for-profit because they have to build a community to get community support to fund it. But
Yeah,
I'm
there's just-
interested in these other forms of community.
Yeah, I think local news is like the biggest opportunity for a community, and especially in terms of like crowdsourcing, because what is local news is so much, it's just people observing things like, oh, this long vacant retail space, somebody just took a photo of a sign that's going up that this restaurant is coming, or I just heard shots fired, I live at these blocks. And so you see like really innovative uses of community. Like I live in Washington, DC, and if I hear gunshots or if I see something really strange, the first thing I do is I tweet and I CC this blogger called Prince of Petworth, Popville. And he has like over 100,000 followers who live in DC. He then retweets me. And then all the kinds of people who either saw what I saw or know what I saw will start like chiming in the comments section. And it's just like amazing to watch that kind of level of crowdsourcing in real time. And you know, I'm sure you've been following what's been going on with Nextdoor, where almost like, yeah, some of the stuff that's been on there has been pretty bad, but there's also been some kind of real-time, crowdsourcing of things going on in neighborhoods and stuff like that. So I think, you know, for a local news outlet, launching some kind of community, some kind of way that people can interact and send in news tips very easily and stuff like that, that's just ripe for exploitation. And I don't think many legacy publishers are doing it.
Yeah.
Stephanie, what's going on in Australia? What's the big what kind of cool things are you seeing on the ground there from media that in Australia in terms of how they're leveraging community? You're on mute.
It's a really dispiriting landscape, to be honest. I think we're way behind in many ways in terms of sort of creators starting really exciting things. There's a little bit of work in from people, big philanthropists investing in news. I'm a journalist from a very traditional news background, so that's obviously my interest. But I'm a former journalist with the Sydney Morning Herald, which is one of the most, I suppose, substantial and acclaimed newspapers in the country. And it's a shadow of its former self. And I took a buyout about 4 years ago to write a book. And I'm now freelancing, and it's really tough. And so I started an email newsletter. I did a course through, I mean, this is my story as opposed to the Australian landscape, but I did a course through the Knight Foundation, an open learning course during the pandemic to learn how to do newsletters, and it actually opened more questions than it actually answered, I think. And I'm just really trying to work out whether as a writer I can make some small incremental revenue from my newsletter, which has got about 1,200 subscribers now after about 26 editions, 26 weeks.
What platform do you use for?
I'm using MailChimp, and I'm not even sure I made the right decision in that. Like, I think my decision to go with MailChimp was based on the idea that potentially I could get some small amount of advertising or sponsorship if I could build my audience, which I guess Substack probably doesn't allow me to do. And everyone keeps telling me, oh, Substack. And I spent money to get into MailChimp. I had someone help me with the back end. So I'm sort of a little wedded to it at the moment. But
well, the nice thing about, and I don't know if Greg, if you've tried this out, but Substack does have some community features. They have something called Threads. They've launched also, I think it's still in beta, like a Slack type competitor that's more kind of real time conversation. And of course, there's comment sections. What's nice is that because most of the people who are commenting are your own email subscribers, it weeds out a lot of the bad comments and weeds out a lot of the noise, which I think is really nice. I haven't been doing a good, because my focus has been on the Facebook and then also these office hours calls. I haven't really done a good job of figuring out how to utilize Substack's community tools yet, but it is something that I should be thinking about. You can launch these things called threads, which is like a discussion topic, and it acts as kind of like a message board type thing. So there's some stuff like that that they're building out. Greg,
Let me just
you-
chime in real quick on that,
Oh,
Simon.
sure.
There's this guy named Mike Sykes. I think it's
Uh-huh.
Sykes. He runs this newsletter called Kicks You Wear.
uh,
And it's basically about the sneaker culture, and it's quite good, but he mostly, I mean, I think some of his best engagement comes from threads. I feel like the conversation and the sort of level of conversation on, I mean, you can imagine this is about people who are just crazy about shoes, but they care about the shoes. There's like a whole amazing culture around this, and it's not just about shoe drops and the latest fashion and stuff. It's deeper and more interesting, and it gets to like, race and cultural issues, and the threads are really almost as interesting as his newsletters are. So there's ways that you can, if you tap into the right community with your topic area, then
Yeah.
you can really hit a nerve.
yeah. And what does he do is he launches like a question, like a prompt.
He puts
the
a prompt
thread.
in. Yeah.
Yeah.
It could be like, sometimes it's controversial. It's usually off the news, but yeah, sometimes
Yeah.
it's just like I had a friend who once, back when comment sections used to be popular on sites, would literally not even post anything on his stories. He would just write a story, and then a community would just start like forming around the stories.
Yeah.
So it just, if you have people who follow you, and if you're in an area where and it is covering a space that's like undercovered, underrepresented, I think you have a lot of opportunity.
Yeah, and that's been on my to-do list, is like, how do I utilize, could I have like a weekly thread where I just ask a question about, who do you think is the best publisher doing this, or what's an interesting way to think about X, Y, and Z, and then create that feedback loop where I say, in my next newsletter, I'm going to quote the best answers. Greg, you have a Substack newsletter, right?
Yeah, I do. I just started it. I'm in the process of finishing a draft of a book on ancient Taoism. I've discovered the actual source of Taoism. And, I realized, Simon, that I need to have more of a digital footprint than I currently have
Mhm.
before I go about publishing the actual book through Kindle. You in those first 7 days when you publish a book, you've got to have some friction. You've got to be able to have good reach and get some sales in order to have Amazon pay attention to you.
Mhm.
So what I'm doing at the moment is I'm populating my Spiritual Secrets site with a bunch of different things, podcasts that I've already done. I've produced over 250 podcasts on the subject of meditation and consciousness and so forth and so on. So once I've got a more of an archive built, then I'm going to chase the threads and the forum aspect of Substack very hard. That's one of the things that actually attracted me to Substack, is I can repurpose my podcasts. I don't know if you realize it or not, but a single 1 hour podcast produces about 25 pages of text.
Yeah.
I've got 300 podcasts done.
And you're transcribing those.
Yeah, I've got them all. I load them right straight into not Discord.
Rev, Temi.
Yeah. In a package that I'm using. And so I've got transcripts built on about 150 of them already.
Mhm.
Over time, I'm actually going to put some of them in foreign languages as well. Microsoft Word has a feature that allows you to automatically transcribe a Word document into multiple languages.
Yeah.
And from my research, it's very, very good, 90% plus with Spanish,
Mhm.
German, French, and believe it or not, Chinese.
Yeah. Okay,
So
Greg, I don't want us to get off topic from the community thing. So are you thinking about at some point trying to utilize some of the Substacks community things to try to interact with your audience a little bit?
Oh, without question.
Yeah.
It's just clear that you have to build up more of an archive first before you do that.
Yeah, for sure. And Greg, I'm hoping to have one of these office hours coming up soon, talking about how to grow your podcast and stuff. And one of the things we'll talk about is kind of doing what you're talking about, like repurposing your content, creating transcripts. I have a good friend of mine, and Lexi's also good friends with her, Jackie Schiff, who's a paying subscriber, and she has a whole agency that specializes in that. So hopefully we can talk about that on an upcoming session.
Super.
Carson. Is Carson still here? Carson, what have you been, so Carson, you work at US News and World Report. Have you guys been thinking about community or anything like that, how to engage more with your audience?
I would say, our model is focused on getting people who are looking to make important life decisions, and they're coming oftentimes for kind of a periodic type of research process that only lasts a certain amount of time, and then they're done, whether it's choosing a college, hospital, or any number of things. And I think we've struggled with building community because of the nature of the types of users coming to us. So I'm really here more to hear about some ideas and things that are working. I don't have a whole lot of things that I can share that are working super well, in part because of our content model is just a little different. But I think, there's some interesting things that we could do. I think we've just done some small experiments and not really seen great results. I'll say one thing that certainly doesn't work is, if you have a large audience already and you're a big publisher, just putting comments, like the ability to comment on articles, doesn't do anything, right?
Yeah.
You've got to build the community first, as you all have been saying. So I think that's definitely.
Or if you're going to put
important takeaway.
comments, you got to prompt people and create like feedback loops to encourage them to keep on coming back and putting more comments. You run the travel vertical for US News and World Report. Just kind of off the top of my head, I happen to have a good friend who you might know, Jen. She met her husband in like a travel hacking Facebook group that was super active, and even had like subgroups, because like there are these people who are like huge travel enthusiasts. They're always trying to find ways to get better and better deals on like flights and stuff like that. So like off the top of my head, that seems like a great community that you could maybe tap into at some point.
Absolutely. I think the travel space is probably a good one. There's some publishers in the travel space that have pretty active communities. The Point Sky, I think, is one. That's a really sort of niche topic, rewards and earning points, and people are super passionate about that. And so I think if you get like that topic right, with the people who are passionate about it in travel, it really, really works.
One thought for you, Carson, is not to keep going back to Facebook, but one of my favorite Facebook groups is called College Admissions Grown and Flown. And it is, it's a group that is, you're getting people for like a year probably. And so the turnover and churn on the group is going to be high, but it works really well. And this is also points to why Facebook is a good platform in this sense for groups, because they have these files that you can kind of pin to the top of the group, and then the group hosts will refer to those. And in this case, I think they charge like, I don't know, it's like a lot. It's a $40 a month. I got in at a lower price, but it's a monthly cost that you pay. And basically I know the women who run this group, and they basically said that what they found was they were trying to do, almost trying to offer too much to people, but basically all they have to do is like have one expert speak once a week, and people will pay that amount of money to get that clear insight, and then an opportunity to sort of ask those experts questions one-on-one. So it falls somewhere in between, like, I'm going to do all of this work on myself to figure out where my kid's going to go to college, and I'm going to pay $5,000 for a consultant who's going to help us. So it's like, what, a year for $500 or something? And for the people that they're targeting, which are part of this much larger Facebook community that they have, that's a free community, it's been a pretty good sell.
That's a great example, Brad. I'll look into them. Thanks for that. one thing that just did come to my mind that is working for us, and it's really old fashioned, but and I guess it counts as community, our webinars. And if you get the right audience, for example, like in the healthcare space, we have a really great audience of, people in the high level positions of hospital systems. And if you get enough of those types of folks onto a webinar, the sponsorship revenue is significant. So, Simon, I'm looking for, to see a sponsor here for the next session we have.
Yeah, I've heard well into the 5 figures of sponsorships for those, and the way that they do it is they put like a registration gate on those webinars, and then it's basically lead generation, so that at the end of the webinar they then turn over all the contact information for everybody who participated. And I think you make a really good point that communities don't have to be super scalable. They can be something like we're doing right now, like as long as you're hosting them on a semi-regular basis, so that you're enough people can attend and feel like they're getting value out of it, and doing what I'm going to do and redistribute the video afterwards, so at least people have the opportunity to participate passively, which is what they do with a lot of webinars. You can provide a lot of value just doing kind of more not one-on-one, but 1 to 10 or 1 to 20 people. I think there's a lot of value to be had there. Did anybody else want to chime in these last few minutes? Anybody have any interesting experiences with communities or anything like that before we go?
I feel like we would be remiss in not hearing something from Lexi. She's giving me these great little things in DMs. I was just looking up some details on her from when we've written about her a couple of times in Trends. You ran and scaled Penny Hoarder. You did, I forget what else you did. You built and sold another business, a teaching website that teaches writers how to make money. Like this thing you're doing now, they got acquired, is quite cool. So you should drop some wisdom on us.
Yeah, Alexis is my own personal unpaid consultant on like a lot of the idea, or a lot of things I launch on the newsletter. I've usually run it past Alexis first.
Thanks. I'm turning red, but you can't see. I think it's really interesting to hear all these things. I think what I think about it is like from a macro level, it's so interesting to hear all the ideas around what tools are out there. But I'm interested to see who solves the problem of because right now I feel like it's very disjointed. You have your media information, and then you have the community somewhere else. And I'm not saying we should go back to the age of the comments, but I'm interested to see who solves this. Is how do you make a solution for a media company so you can have the content with the community? And Circle, which I dropped the link to them in the chat. They're a popular community group that actually came out of Teachable. And I'm seeing more and more communities move on to Circle. It's my personal favorite out of all the ones we talked about. I think it's really user friendly, and it's kind of halfway between a Facebook group and Slack. I think it has good features from both of them. But they just introduced a way to add courses. So they're community first, but now you can add courses onto their platform. So it's a perfect solution for a course creator that wants to have a community. And I thought that was really interesting because I haven't really seen any other community builders make a way to easily have a course, which is the closest thing that I've seen to someone adding content. So I'm just curious to see who solves this problem. and it's a hard one because it's hard to have content and community in the same place. But right now we're all, we all have links on our sites. It's hey, go to Facebook or go to Discord, and you're sending people away from the content and away from your hub. So how can we have it all in one place?
Yeah, I taught a course with the University of Oregon's journalism program a few months back, and we used some kind of community platform where supposedly people were going to be, participating in weekly discussions, and basically everybody logged in once and put some biographical information in there, and then we never used it again. So it wasn't but I mean, it was our first time doing it. We probably could have done a better job of having prompts and stuff in it, but yeah, it's hard. It's kind of hard to get to kind of weave all those things together, basically, I think.
I think one last thought, if you give me one more comment here, sorry to hog
Sure.
the space, but
No.
the thing that
No.
I've noticed is if you actually think of the community as the content, that's the way to solve that. And don't be afraid of using the platform. And I think it helps us because we're a paid platform with Trends. Like, it doesn't matter to me whether, if the best stuff, like if Sam wanted to just tell me a story about some business, I wouldn't ask him to write it up for the newsletter. He would just put it in Facebook. He used to tell me, like, that's the first thing I do when I wake up in the morning, and the last thing I do before I go to bed at night is I look at the group and I just listen to what people are talking about. And he just posts things. He goes on the road. He's just like, oh, there's this cool thing. And he'll tell you about it in like the most excitable way. And you want to come back to that. Like, do you want to open your email every week? Not the same. So
Yeah.
if you can make the community the place where the action is with the content as much as you can, then I think that's a way of solving that, Lexi.
I think you've done that because I was thinking about like my own personal interaction and Trends. I don't even read the content. I have no idea what your reports are. I don't read the emails. I only look at the community.
Exactly.
So that's, you know, I don't even, you could, and it's so interesting to me because if you think about it that way, you know, if you 80-20 the business, I don't know how much it's costing you to make all those reports and stuff.
I know,
You
exactly.
could
You're
just
right.
have the community and probably your margin would be so much higher.
Yeah.
But you've dialed back the reports, right? And the
We've
focus
definitely
on-
dialed back the reports. Yeah. In the early days, we spent a lot of money on, and a lot of time, and consequently a lot of money on the longer researched reports. And people, basically, they just like decks. They just want to read slides. So you don't have to go as in depth as you think you do.
Yeah, cool. Well, thanks everybody. Once again, another successful office hours. One thing I want to get better about in the future, and I kind of do this ad hoc now, is thinking who is a good person who's like really experienced in this. Like this week, we were fortunate to have Brad join and be able to share his experience. If for the people who were on 2 weeks ago, I pinged 2 people who worked at the leading ad tech platforms for newsletters, and they just happened to be available last minute. But I need to be thinking a little bit, like, for instance, right before this started, I pinged this guy named Terrell Johnson, who has like a really like vibrant like running community that he runs on on Substack, and he's been using their Threads feature really well, but he wasn't available because I waited too long to ping him. So I think in the future, I need to be a little bit more strategic about thinking who are some people who might not be paid subscribers, but who could, contribute to this group, and we can pepper them with questions. So that's something I'm going to be doing. I'm also going to continue to poll people about what they want me to cover in it. So do not hesitate to reach out to me and tell me things that you want me to cover in future office hours. And I think that's all I wanted to say. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. And every single time I have to figure out how to do that again. Okay, here we go.